They were analyzing a famous defeat in class. Then the gunnery sergeant said, "That was my last stand." Welcome, everyone. Before our story begins, I just wanted to say thank you. And if you have a moment, a quick comment below is the single biggest motivation for me to keep creating these stories. Honestly. And now let's get to our story. The lecture hall at the Alliance War College went dark. A low hum filled the space as the central hollow emitter spun to life. Cadets from a dozen different species straightened in their seats, their attention absolute. A river of cosmic dust and stellar gas materialized in the center of the room. It twisted and coiled on itself, a celestial serpent of violent sapphire and venomous green. This was the Serpent's veil, and even as a three-dimensional projection, it looked like a place where fleets went to die. Professor Lyron stepped into the dim light of the hologram, his tall, gaunt frame silhouetted against the nebula. His voice, a resonant baritone polished by decades of lecturing, filled the hall. "The Battle of the Serpent's Veil," he began, his tone somber. "3 years ago, this nebula became the tomb of the Alliance's entire Third Fleet. Over 15,000 souls lost, 52 capital ships gone without a trace." He gestured, and the hologram zoomed in on a cluster of red icons representing the Third Fleet. Another cluster, a swarm of angry yellow dots, represented the enemy, the Vak'kori. "The official history, the one you will all be tested on, is clear," Lyron continued. "Admiral Thorne, a decorated but prideful commander, was lured into the Veil by a small Vak'kori raiding party. He believed his superior firepower and technology would give him an advantage in the chaotic environment. The yellow dots swarmed the red icons. The simulation was brutal and quick. Red icons flickered and died one by one. He was wrong. The Vak'kori had prepared the battle space. The nebula's sensor interference rendered the Third Fleet's long-range targeting systems useless. They were ambushed, surrounded, and annihilated in a chaotic, close-quarters brawl they were never equipped to fight. There were no distress calls. No escape pods were ever recovered. It was a complete and total loss." Lyron let the image of the dead fleet hang in the air. The silence in the hall was heavy with respect for the fallen. "The Battle of the Serpent's Veil is and remains the single greatest tactical blunder in modern military history. A textbook case of tactical arrogance. A lesson," he said, his eyes sweeping across the young, eager faces, "that you will all do well to remember." He paused, letting the weight of the tragedy settle. The room was perfectly still. A low, gravelly voice cut through the silence from the back rows. "Wrong, Professor." A ripple of whispers spread through the hall. Heads turned, a sea of uniformed cadets trying to find the source of the interruption. Professor Lyron's brow furrowed, his academic composure momentarily broken by irritation. "I beg your pardon?" he asked, his voice sharp. A figure rose from the shadows of the tiered seating. He wasn't a young cadet, he was older. His academy uniform stretched tight across shoulders that were built for bracing against recoil, not for sitting in a classroom. The faint web of scars around one eye was almost invisible in the dim light, but the posture was unmistakable. It was the posture of a man who had spent more time in a gunner's chair than a lecture hall. "Gunnery Sergeant Jax," Lyron said, reading the man's rank from his uniform. "You are here for a mandatory command course, I believe. Not to interrupt my lecture." "Just keeping the lecture accurate," Jax replied, his voice flat and devoid of apology. The entire hall was now staring at him, the somber mood replaced by a tense electric curiosity. Professor Lyron adjusted his tunic, reclaiming his authority. "And what precisely was inaccurate about my presentation, Sergeant?" "It is pulled directly from the official Alliance historical archives and Admiral Thorne's own after-action reports." "A lot," Jax said simply. "First, we didn't chase them. We herded them." The murmuring in the hall grew louder. Lyron held up a hand for silence. "We herded them?" Lyron repeated, a note of disbelief coloring his voice. "The reports indicate a disorganized pursuit." "The reports are wrong," Jax stated. He took a step forward into the faint glow of the holographic nebula. "Second, it wasn't an ambush." "Sergeant, you are making extraordinary claims," Lyron warned, his patience clearly wearing thin. "The Third Fleet was wiped out. That is an undeniable, tragic fact. To suggest otherwise is an insult to their memory." I'm not insulting their memory. I'm honoring it, Jack shot back, his voice hardening for the first time. It wasn't an ambush. It was a kill box. He paused, letting the words sink in. Our kill box. The hall fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Liren stared at him, speechless for a moment before finding his voice. This is madness. That is unsubstantiated fantasy. Where could you possibly get this information, Sergeant? What is your source? Jax's gaze was as steady and unyielding as a targeting lock. He met the professor's eyes across the darkened hall, his voice dropping to a low, clear tone that every single person could hear. From my gunnery chair, aboard the combat frigate Stiletto. He let the name of the ship hang in the dead air for a beat. I was there. The office of Admiral Thorn was as cold and silent as deep space. Polished chrome gleamed under sterile lighting. One wall was a vast, slowly rotating holographic star chart of the entire sector. It was a room that smelled of recycled air and authority. It was a room built for reports and procedure, not for men like Gunnery Sergeant Jax. Admiral Thorn, a man whose face seemed permanently set in a stern frown, sat behind a large metal desk. He didn't invite Jax to sit. He held up a datapad, its screen glowing with text. Sergeant, Thorn began, his voice devoid of warmth. I have your file here. I have the official report on the Serpent's Veil incident, a report I signed myself. And I have your medical evaluation from when your escape pod was recovered. Jax stood at ease, hands clasped loosely behind his back. He said nothing. He just waited. The official report states unequivocally that the Third Fleet was lost with all hands. Thorn continued, tapping the screen with a finger. No other survivors. No wreckage recovered that wasn't consistent with total annihilation. Are you disputing the official findings of the Alliance Fleet Command? Yes, sir, Jack said. The words were respectful, but the tone was flat, a simple statement of fact. Thorn's frown deepened. Your medical file, it notes severe dehydration, malnutrition, and, I quote, significant psychological trauma consistent with extreme combat exposure and survivor's guilt. The psych eval suggests a high probability of memory corruption. My memory's fine, Admiral. Is it? Thorn leaned forward, his voice taking on a condescending, almost paternalistic tone. Sergeant, I understand what you went through. Men in your position often construct narratives to cope with unimaginable loss. They create order from chaos. They invent meaning where there was none. It's a way for the mind to protect itself. Jax's expression didn't change, but his eyes, for a fraction of a second, hardened. He had heard this before, the quiet pity, the clinical dismissal of what he saw, what he did. It wasn't chaos, Jax said, his voice low. It was a plan. A plan that resulted in the loss of 52 capital ships? Thorn scoffed, shaking his head. That's not a plan, Sergeant. That's a catastrophe. Depends on what you were trying to kill. Thorn sighed, the sound of a man running out of patience. He set the datapad down. Look, son, I'm willing to overlook your little outburst in the lecture hall. We'll put it down to stress. You'll continue your courses, and we will forget this whole thing ever happened. For the first time, Jack shifted his weight. He looked past the Admiral at the silent, swirling star chart on the wall. I'm not looking for you to overlook anything, Admiral. I'm looking for you to see the truth. I have the truth right here, Thorn said, tapping the datapad again. No, Jack said, his gaze finally locking back onto the Admiral's. You have a story. You? I have the proof, he paused. I want to show you something. The black box recorder from my gunnery pod. The final 8 minutes. The briefing room was dark, the only light coming from the massive view screen that took up the entire far wall. Admiral Thorn sat in a command chair, arms crossed, face a mask of skepticism. Jack stood by the control console. This is the raw, unedited feed from gun camera 7, aboard the frigate Stiletto, Jax's voice said, now coming from the room's speakers as he narrated the recording. Timestamp corresponds to the moment the Vak'kori main fleet engaged us. The screen flickered to life. The first thing you heard was the sound, a deafening, percussive thump, thump, thump of mass drivers firing, overlaid with the high-pitched scream of stressed metal and the electronic shriek of targeting alarms. The view was from inside Jax's turret, A holographic HUD shimmered over a chaotic scene of swirling green cadet and brilliant flashes of light. Outside, the battle was pure, unadulterated hell. Vak'kori attack ships, small insect-like craft, swarmed around the larger Alliance cruisers like piranhas. They moved in unnatural, jerky patterns, their weapons spitting streams of golden plasma that tore through Alliance armor plating. Target lock. Hostile designation 114. Firing, Jax's recorded voice said, calm amidst the chaos. The view shook violently as his cannons fired. A Vak'kori ship exploded in a silent flash of light, but three more immediately took its place. The HUD was a sea of red targeting brackets. There were too many, far too many. Comms are a mess, a frantic voice crackled over the audio feed. Mayday, Mayday, this is the cruiser Valiant. Our engines are hit. We're venting atmosphere. They're all over us. The voice cut out into a burst of static. Through the viewport, Jax's camera caught sight of the Valiant. Its entire midsection was a gaping wound of molten metal. It listed heavily, then broke apart, consumed by a swarm of the small enemy ships. On the command deck, Thorn nodded slowly, a grim, self-satisfied look on his face. This was exactly what the reports described, a disorganized slaughter. The view on the screen spun wildly as Jax's turret tracked another target. He fired, missed, fired again. A hit. Another enemy ship vanished. But the swarm was endless. It was a tidal wave of ships and weapons fire. The targeting computer wailed, unable to keep up. Hull integrity at 60% in my section, another voice yelled over the comms. Shields are failing. Warning, proximity alert, the turret's automated voice droned. A Vak'kori ship appeared directly in front of the viewport, so close you could see the intricate patterns on its dark hull. Jax's cannons roared, and the ship disintegrated just meters from his position. The screen flashed white from the explosion. This just confirms the official record, Sergeant, Thorn said, his voice calm and steady in the dark briefing room. The sounds of the battle still raged from the speakers. Utter chaos, a complete tactical collapse. There was no plan here, only survival. Just watch, Jax's voice said from the briefing room's speakers. A cold command laid over the audio of the roaring battle. On the screen, his turret did something that defied all combat logic. A Vak'kori destroyer was lining up for a kill shot on the Stiletto's port side, an easy target, but Jax's cannons didn't move to engage it. Instead, the turret swung wildly to the right, aiming at a seemingly empty patch of swirling green gas. What is he doing? Admiral Thorn muttered, leaning forward in his chair, his skepticism momentarily replaced by genuine confusion. That's tactical suicide. He's ignoring a direct threat. The targeting computer on the HUD flashed with warnings. No target lock. Multiple threats detected on port flank. Blind calculation in progress. Jax, what is your fire solution? A voice screamed over the comms channel. Talk to me! You're pointing at nothing! Calculating, Jax's recorded voice replied, impossibly calm. Just hold them off for 5 more seconds. The view shook as the Stiletto took a hit. The screen flickered with static. The automated warning system droned. Warning. Hull breach detected in section Gamma. Then, through the swirling nebula, something emerged. It wasn't another fighter. It was a mountain. A grotesque, organic mountain of dark, chitinous plating and pulsating bioluminescent sacs. It moved with a slow, terrible grace, dwarfing the Alliance cruisers around it. It was the source of the swarm, the Vak'kori hive ship. My God, Thorn breathed, his voice barely a whisper. And in that instant, the chaos of the battle found a single, terrible purpose. The Valiant, its engines dead and its hull split open, used its last reserves of power to fire its main spinal cannon. The frigate Triton, already venting plasma from its bridge, turned its entire missile arsenal toward the new target. Across the battlefield, every remaining Alliance ship, crippled and burning, performed the same final suicidal act. They ignored the swarm that was killing them and focused every last joule of energy on the hive ship. It was never a disorganized retreat. It was a coordinated sacrifice. Jax's turret fired, its mass driver rounds streaking across space toward the colossal target. The screen showed dozens of other weapon trails converging on the same point. The hive ship exploded. There was no sound, only a flash of pure white light that consumed the entire screen, washing out everything in blinding energy. When the view returned, the space where the hive ship had been was empty. The thousands of smaller Vak'kori ships suddenly flew erratically, their swarm intelligence gone. They collided with each other, their movements now truly chaotic. The video feed dissolved into static. The screen went black. The briefing room was utterly silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the life support systems. Admiral Thorne sat motionless, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his chair. He stared at the blank screen, his face pale. Jax's real voice, quiet and steady, filled the silence. The Third Fleet's mission was never to win the battle, Admiral. It was to win the war. We knew about the hive ship, but we didn't know how to get to it. It was always protected by the swarm. He took a breath. So we gave the swarm what it wanted, a feast, our entire fleet. Admiral Thorne, the real Admiral Thorne, lured them into the Veil, where their numbers would be their greatest advantage and their greatest weakness. He forced the Queen to expose herself to finish us off. He looked at the stunned Admiral sitting before him. We weren't the bait, the fleet was. Bait for their Queen. We paid with 52 ships and 15,000 souls, and we cut the head off the snake. For a long moment, Admiral Thorne didn't speak. He slowly slumped back in his chair, the rigid authority draining from his posture. He looked down at the data pad on the desk beside him, the one containing the official report he had signed, as if it were a piece of garbage. He had built a part of his career on analyzing the Thorne blunder. He had taught classes on it, and it had all been a lie, a necessary, heroic lie. All those years, he whispered to himself. We called them failures. Jax said nothing. He let the Admiral process the weight of the truth, the weight of condemning heroes as fools. Just as Thorne opened his mouth to speak again, a piercing alarm blared through the room. Red alert lights flashed, bathing the space in a pulsing, urgent crimson. Priority 1 alert, a voice tight with professionalism announced over the internal comms. All senior staff to the command center immediately. Thorne was on his feet in an instant, his shock replaced by the ingrained reflexes of a commander. On screen, he barked. The black screen of the view screen instantly switched to a live tactical display. It showed a massive Alliance space station, Citadel station, orbited by the blue icons of the Fifth Fleet. And swarming toward them was a cloud of yellow icons so vast it almost blotted out the star chart. Report, Thorne demanded. It's the Vak'kori, Admiral, the comms officer replied, his voice strained. A massive swarm, 10 times the size of the force at the Veil. They just emerged from hyperspace. They're attacking Citadel Station. The room went cold. On the screen, they could see the Fifth Fleet engaging the enemy, their blue icons firing bravely into the overwhelming yellow tide. They were fighting head-on, trying to thin the numbers, completely unaware of the enemy's true structure. They were making the same mistake the entire galaxy thought the Third Fleet had made 3 years ago. And this time there was no trap, only a slaughter. The tactical display on the command center's main view screen was a portrait of a losing battle. A thin blue line of Alliance Fifth Fleet icons struggled to hold its formation against a grinding, endless wave of yellow. The Vak'kori Swarm moved not as a fleet, but as a force of nature, a yellow tide that eroded everything it touched. The cruiser Indomitable is reporting shields at 12%, a young tactical officer called out, his voice tight with stress. They're being swarmed. On the screen, the blue icon for the Indomitable was completely engulfed by dozens of yellow dots. It flickered once, twice, then vanished from the map, replaced by a temporary red marker labeled Vessel Lost. They're executing Doctrine 7 Gamma, another analyst muttered, staring helplessly at his console. Layered defense against a numerically superior foe, firing on the most immediate threats to preserve the battle line. It's straight from the textbook. Admiral Thorne stood rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was watching a nightmare unfold in real time. Every textbook tactic, every established doctrine was failing before his eyes. For every Vak'kori drone the Fifth Fleet destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. They were swatting at flies while a monster was breaking down their door. It's the Veil all over again, Thorne said, his voice a low, agonized whisper. We're watching it happen all over again. The comms channel crackled with desperation. This is Captain Eva Rostova of the Stalwart. We can't hold the line. They're breaking through, requesting permission to... Her voice was cut off by a burst of static as the Stalwart's icon began to flash red. The command center was filled with a sense of organized, professional despair. Officers and technicians performed their duties perfectly, reporting on the fleet's systematic destruction with calm, precise language. They were documenting the failure, following procedure all the way to the bitter end. They were powerless. They were watching their fleet get eaten alive, and the only thing the rulebook told them to do was die bravely. They're fighting it wrong. The words, spoken in Jax's low, gravelly voice, were not loud, but they cut through the room's tense atmosphere like a plasma torch. Admiral Thorne turned slowly to face him. The other officers looked up from their consoles, their expressions a mix of confusion and annoyance at the interruption. "What did you say, Sergeant?" Thorne asked, his voice strained. Jax's eyes never left the tactical display. He pointed a scarred finger at the chaotic swarm. "That," he said, "is not a mob. It's a pack of wolves, and you don't fight a wolf pack by killing the weakest ones in the back. You go for the throat." He stepped closer to the screen, his gaze intense, seeing patterns where the others only saw chaos. "Look, see that cluster on the flank of the Stalwart? See how they move together? They aren't just swarming, they're being directed. There's an alpha drone in the center of each of those mini-swarms. A lieutenant. Kill the alpha and its pack falls into chaos. They lose their purpose." A flicker of understanding, of desperate hope, crossed Thorne's face. "And how," he asked, his voice barely audible, "are we supposed to identify these alphas in the middle of that hell?" Jax finally turned away from the screen to look directly at the Admiral. His expression was one of absolute, unshakable certainty. It was the face of a man who had stared into that hell for 8 hours and walked out the other side. "I can," he said. He let that statement hang in the air for a second, the full weight of its audacity settling on the room. An enlisted man, a non-commissioned officer, claiming he could see what an entire fleet's worth of advanced sensors and trained officers could not. He took a final step toward Thorne. He did not ask. He did not request. He commanded, "Give me access to the fleet's targeting network. Now." Groan, screech, crack! A loud noise came from the ceiling above them. It was the sound of metal giving up. A massive support beam, twisted and broken from the explosion, tore free. It fell from the ceiling with a deafening crash. It landed directly in front of the sealed exit door. Dust and debris filled the air. When the dust settled, a student screamed. Boral, the big Carlene student, was trapped. The heavy beam had fallen on his legs. He cried out in pain. "My comms are working!" Ilara shouted over the siren. She quickly activated the emergency channel. "Valerius, Officer Valerius, do you read me?" Static. Then a voice. "Read you, Professor. What is situation?" "We have an injury," Ilara yelled. "A student is trapped under a structural beam. We need help." There was a pause. The static hissed. "Professor, I see the collapse on my sensors. That beam is 2 metric tons. We cannot get equipment to you. The corridors are blocked. Tell your students to stay clear of the beam. There is nothing to be done. I repeat, there is nothing to be done." The words hung in the air. Nothing to be done. Liam heard it. Ilara saw his face. His expression changed. The calm focus was gone. It was replaced by something else. Something harder. Something angry. He looked at Boral, who was moaning in pain. He looked at the massive, unmovable beam. He looked at Ilara. Their eyes met for 1 second. "Liam, no!" Ilara shouted, reading his mind. "It's impossible!" He did not listen. He was already moving. He put his shoulders under the cold, heavy metal. He planted his feet. He took a deep, ragged breath. A sound came from his throat. It was not a human sound. It was a deep, angry roar. It was the sound of pure effort. The sound of a body pushing past every limit. The muscles in his back and legs bulged. They looked like they would tear through his clothes. The veins in his neck stood out like cables. The metal beam groaned. For a second, nothing happened. Then, slowly, an inch at a time, the beam began to lift from the floor. He was lifting it. He was lifting 2 tons of twisted metal. His face was a mask of pure agony and determination. He was doing the impossible. "Get him out," Liam roared, his voice strained. Alara and another student rushed forward. They grabbed Boral's arms. They pulled him free from under the beam. As soon as Boral was clear, Liam let out a final shout. He let the beam go. It crashed back down to the floor. The sound was like thunder. Liam fell to his knees. He was on all fours, his head hanging low. He was breathing hard, deep gasps that filled the silent room. The only sounds were the wailing siren and the breathing of the human who had just done the impossible. A tense silence fell over the command center. Every officer watched as a junior technician, with trembling hands, rerouted the entire Fifth Fleet's fire control network. Data streams from hundreds of ships, thousands of gunnery pods, all converged on a single auxiliary console where Jax now stood. He wasn't a commander. He was something new. The central nervous system of an entire fleet's worth of firepower. Admiral Thorne's voice boomed over the fleet-wide command channel, laced with an authority that bordered on desperation. "All ships, all gunnery officers, you are to disregard standard targeting protocols. You will receive new fire solutions from Fire Control Actual. Execute his commands without question or delay." Thorne out. On the bridge of the destroyer's Defiant, Gunnery Officer Kalen stared at his console in disbelief. "Fire Control? Actual? Who the hell is that?" His answer came a second later, a voice crackling in his ear, low and rough, a voice that sounded like grinding metal. "Defiant Gunner," Jax's voice said, calm and direct. "You have a wing of Vak'kori bombers on your starboard approach. Ignore them." Kalen froze. "Ignore them? Sir, they have a firing solution on our bridge." "I see them," Jax replied, his tone unchanging. "Your target is the fighter escort behind them. The one flying a lazy S pattern. Grid 4 Alpha Niner. Lock on." It was an insane order. It went against every word of his training. You always engage the most immediate threat. But the Admiral's command had been absolute. With a curse under his breath, Kalen bypassed the screaming proximity alerts, his targeting reticle sliding past the bombers and locking onto the single, seemingly insignificant fighter. "Target locked," Kalen gritted out. "But this is fire," Jax commanded. Kalen slammed his fist down on the firing stud. A trio of mass driver rounds, invisible in the vacuum, launched from his turret. For a tense second, nothing happened. The bombers continued their run. Then the small fighter in the distance vanished in a silent, brilliant flash of light. And the effect was instantaneous. The wing of bombers, which had been flying in a perfect deadly formation, suddenly broke apart. Their movements became erratic, purposeless. Two of them collided in a shower of sparks. The others veered off course, their attack run completely dissolving into chaos. They were no longer a threat. They were just debris waiting to happen. A stunned silence filled the Defiant's gunnery pod. What just happened?" Kalen whispered. Jax's voice was already in his ear, moving on. "Stalwart Gunner, Sector 9. You see that heavy cruiser taking fire? Don't shoot at the ships attacking it. Shoot at the scout ship 2 kilometers behind them, the one hiding in the debris field. Now." Across the fleet, the same scene repeated. A gunner on the Indomitable was told to ignore a torpedo and instead shoot the drone that launched it. A gunner on the Vigilance was ordered to fire into what looked like empty space, only to see a cloaked Alpha drone shimmer into existence for a split second before exploding. The initial skepticism on the comms channel evaporated. It was replaced by a dawning, electrifying awe. The gunners, who moments before had been fighting a losing battle for survival, were now part of something else. They were a single, precise weapon wielded by one mind. The channel, once filled with cries of desperation, now crackled with the clean, efficient language of the hunt. Target confirmed. Firing solution locked. Splash 1 Alpha. Good kill. Next target. Jax stood before his console, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of destruction. His eyes darted across dozens of data feeds, seeing not chaos but a complex, intricate dance. He saw the connections, the lines of command, the invisible strings that held the swarm together. And one by one, with cold, methodical precision, he was cutting them. The blue line of the Fifth Fleet stopped bending. It held. Then, with a sudden coordinated fury, it began to push back. It was no longer a defense. It was a counterattack. What had been a solid, impenetrable wall of yellow on the tactical display began to look porous. Holes appeared in the Vak'kori formation, not small gaps, but massive, gaping wounds where entire sections of the swarm, their alpha drones eliminated, had descended into self-destructive chaos. The change in the Alliance ships was palpable. They moved with a new predatory confidence. Destroyers, once fighting for their lives, now surged forward in wolf packs of their own, their guns no longer firing wildly at the nearest threat, but making precise, calculated shots at targets designated by Jax. They weren't just returning fire anymore. They were hunting. "The stalwart is clear," Captain Rostova's voice yelled over the command channel, no longer strained, but filled with a fierce, triumphant energy. "We've punched a hole. Repeat, we have punched a hole on the western flank." The battle had fundamentally shifted. The Fifth Fleet was no longer trying to weather the storm. They were the storm. Their cannons fired in controlled volleys, a rhythmic, pounding drumbeat of destruction. Plasma torpedoes, once used defensively, were now launched in coordinated waves, not at the swarm itself, but at the empty space behind it, cutting off retreat paths for the disoriented Vak'kori packs. The view from the command center screen was no longer a scene of desperation, but one of brutal, controlled dominance. It was a masterclass in decapitation warfare. The Fifth Fleet moved like a surgeon's scalpel, slicing through the swarm, cutting out the command nodes, leaving the rest of the body to twitch and die. "They're breaking," Admiral Thorne whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief and awe. "They're actually breaking." He was right. The Vak'kori for the first time showed signs of confusion on a massive scale. Their endless, aggressive tide faltered. The swarm, which had moved with a single, terrifying purpose, was now fracturing into smaller, isolated pockets of panicked resistance. The hunters had become the hunted. Aboard the Defiant, Gunnery Officer Kalen worked his console with a fluid grace he didn't know he possessed. Jax's voice was a constant presence in his ear, a guiding hand pointing him toward the enemy's heart. "Defiant," Jax's voice commanded, "with the Vigilance and the Triton, form a spearhead. I want a clear firing lane directly through the center of that main cluster. On my mark." Kalen grinned, a feral, unfamiliar expression. He keyed his comm. "Ready when you are, fire control. Let's go hunting." The spearhead of the Fifth Fleet, led by the Defiant, tore through the heart of the Vak'kori formation, creating a corridor of clear space amidst the chaos. For the first time in hours, the view screen of the Alliance Command Center showed more empty space than enemy ships. A wave of triumphant shouts echoed across the comms channel. They had done it. They had broken the swarm. But the battle wasn't over. From the densest, most protected part of the remaining enemy fleet, a shadow began to move. The smaller drones parted like a curtain, revealing what they had been shielding. It was just like the recording. A grotesque mountain of dark, living armor and pulsating, sickly yellow sacks of light. A new hive ship. It rose from its cocoon of drones, and a palpable wave of dread washed over the comms, silencing the cheers. This was the heart of the swarm, the final boss. On the bridge of the Fifth Fleet's flagship, the Olympus, Admiral Petrov stared at the monstrous vessel. His face was a grim mask. Every regulation, every wargame simulation, had a protocol for engaging a command-class vessel. It involved feints, flanking maneuvers, and a prolonged siege. They didn't have time for any of that. He keyed the fleet-wide command channel, his voice cutting through the sudden silence. Every captain, every officer, every gunner listened. "Sergeant Jax," Petrov said, his voice clear and formal, broadcasting for all to hear. "You have the con. What are your orders?" The silence that followed was a different kind. It was the silence of 100,000 tons of disbelief. An admiral in the middle of a fleet-defining battle had just handed command authority to an enlisted gunnery sergeant. Jax's voice answered a moment later, as calm as if he were ordering a drink. "Admiral, acknowledge all ships are slave to my fire control." "They are, Sergeant," Petrov confirmed. "Good," Jax said. Then his voice shifted, losing its conversational tone and taking on the hard, sharp edge of a killer. "All ships, all gunners. Disregard the main hull of that thing. Do you see the large, pulsating yellow sacs. Those are its primary nerve clusters. We're not just going to kill it. We're going to give it a stroke. A beat of silence, then a chorus of confirmations rippled across the network. There was no hesitation. Concentrate all fire, Jax commanded, his voice rising with a cold fury. On the nodes, fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, engage. The Fifth Fleet unleashed hell. It was no longer a battle. It was a focused, synchronized execution. 1,000 lances of light, plasma, and kinetic energy from every ship in the fleet converged, not on the massive hull of the hive ship, but on the glowing, vulnerable sacs. The first volley struck the largest node at the ship's center. It didn't explode. It burst like a hideous, overripe fruit. The yellow light within it extinguished, and the entire hive ship visibly shuddered, a tremor passing through its colossal frame. Next node, Jax roared. Port side, upper quadrant. Fire! Again, the fleet fired as one. Another sac ruptured, spewing vaporous yellow fluid into the void. The hive ship's movements became sluggish, spasming. It was dying not like a machine, but like a creature being dismembered. One by one, under Jax's relentless direction, the fleet targeted and destroyed the nerve centers. With its final node ruptured, the hive ship convulsed one last time. A silent scream seemed to emanate from it as cracks of internal energy spiderwebbed across its dark hull. Then it simply fell apart, collapsing in on itself in a massive, implosive flash that lit up the entire battlefield. And with its death, the swarm died. The remaining tens of thousands of Vak'kori drones stopped instantly. Their engines went cold. Their weapon ports went dark. They just stopped, drifting aimlessly in space like a sudden graveyard. The noise, the relentless pressure, it all vanished in a single heartbeat. The battle was over. Silence reigned on the comms channel, a profound, deafening silence of shock and absolute victory. The Fifth Fleet floated, victorious, in a sea of dead and drifting enemies. On the bridge of the flagship Olympus, the silence was absolute. The tactical display, once a raging storm of yellow and red, was now calm. A field of static blue icons floated serenely in a graveyard of inert, gray enemy signatures. The battle was won. The station was safe. The Fifth Fleet had not just survived, it had annihilated a force that should have erased it from existence. In the Alliance War College Command Center, hundreds of light years away, the same silence held sway. The staff stood frozen at their stations, staring at the victory on the screen. Admiral Thorne slowly lowered himself into his command chair. He looked old, tired, but the rigid lines of skepticism on his face had been replaced by something else, a profound, weary respect. He leaned forward and keyed the secure channel, patching him directly through to the Olympus's bridge. The channel was open, but for a long moment he said nothing, simply listening to the quiet hum of a victorious fleet. Finally he spoke. His voice was not loud. It was not a grand speech for the history books. It was the quiet, simple admission of a man who had just witnessed the impossible. Well done, Sergeant. The line clicked shut. That was all. No commendations, no talk of medals or promotions. Just a simple acknowledgement from one old soldier to another. And in the silence of the command center, those 4 words carried more weight than any formal citation ever could. Months later, the main lecture hall at the Alliance War College was full again. The air was thick with anticipation, but the audience was different. There were no fresh-faced young cadets. The seats were filled with decorated ship captains, seasoned fleet commanders, and grim-faced strategists from Alliance High Command. Even Professor Lyron sat in the front row, a datapad in his lap, his expression one of intense, focused study. On the stage, under the soft glow of the main holo emitter, stood Gunnery Sergeant Jax. He wore a simple, clean duty uniform, no different from the one he'd worn that first day. The holographic display behind him wasn't showing a star chart. It was showing the raw, chaotic footage from his gunnery pod. He let the recording play for a full minute. The alarms, the explosions, the frantic comms chatter. He let the assembled officers feel the raw, unfiltered reality of the fight. Then, he paused it. The textbooks, Jax began, his voice the same low gravel it had always been, will tell you about kill ratios, fleet formations, and optimal weapon arcs. They will give you doctrines and procedures for every conceivable scenario. He gestured to the frozen image of the battle behind him. The textbooks are not wrong, they are just incomplete. They teach you how to fight a battle. They don't teach you how to fight the enemy. He looked out at the sea of high-ranking officers, meeting their eyes without a hint of intimidation. The Vak'kori don't care about your formations. They don't respect your battle lines. They are not a fleet. They are a force of nature. And you don't fight a hurricane with the shield wall. You find the eye of the storm. He started the video again, fast-forwarding to the moment he ignored the bombers to target the single Alpha drone. Your sensors will tell you where the enemy is. Your experience, he said, tapping his temple, tells you where they are going to be. Your training will tell you to engage the biggest threat. Your instincts will tell you to engage the right one. He stopped the lecture. He didn't have charts or graphs. He had no grand strategic theory. He just had the truth, scarred and brutal. That's the lesson, the only one that matters. The rulebook gets you to the fight. After that, he said, his gaze sweeping across the silent, attentive room, you throw the book away and you just see the battle. He looked at them one last time. Class dismissed. Late that night, Admiral Thorne was alone in his office, reviewing the preliminary after-action reports from the Citadel engagement. An intelligence officer stood silently before his desk. There's one more thing, Admiral, the officer said, his voice low. Something odd. Thorne looked up from his datapad. Go on. The two hive ships, the one at the Vale and the one at Citadel Station. Our deep-range analysis of their energy signatures is complete. The officer hesitated. Sir, they weren't identical. What do you mean? Thorne asked, leaning forward. The energy profiles suggest they were siblings, from the same brood perhaps, but their quantum signatures are traceable, and they don't trace back to the Serpent's Veil. The officer slid a datapad across the desk. A star chart appeared, showing the known galaxy. A red line extended from the Serpent's Veil, and another from Citadel Station, both leading out into the vast, unexplored darkness of the intergalactic void. Sir, the officer said, his voice barely a whisper, we didn't kill their queen, we just killed two of her daughters. The Veil wasn't their home, it was just the edge of their hunting ground. And that is where our story ends. For now. Thank you so much for spending your time here with me. If you enjoyed Jax's journey, a simple like or a quick comment sharing your favorite part would mean the world. And if you'd like to be here for the next story, please consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, take care.